What's up everyone, it's Austin here from Make Pop Music and Austin Hall Audio, and today we are back with another video. And for the video today, I wanted to cover a topic that we get a ton of questions on, and that is how to record perfect guitar DI. So if you don't know what guitar DI is, it basically stands for guitar direct input. So if you're recording an electric guitar and you kind of have that clean sound coming through straight from the guitar and pick up through your interface, there's no amp, there's no pedals, that is guitar DI. And we get this question a lot when we make videos on how to make certain guitar tones or how to mix guitar, because everybody kind of runs into common issues with their guitar DI where it's noisy, they didn't pick the right kind of guitar, they didn't pick the right pickup, they didn't have their playing technique down. And so all of those things can kind of come together and make really, really big differences on the final outcome for how your guitar tone sounds or how your guitar is mixed in a song. So in this video today, I wanted to go over some of the common pitfalls that I see that people just don't really notice when they're recording their guitar DI, how to overcome some of those, and show you some real life examples on how big of a difference these things can make once you do start putting tones on and putting them in a record. So we're going to talk about a lot of stuff today. If you want, like, comment, and subscribe. That definitely helps us out a ton. If you have a question about this video, let us know in the comments down below and I will answer those. And if you want to support the channel, you can head over to makepopmusic.com and check out all of our stuff over there. But let's hop into Cubase so I can show you some of these guitar DI pitfalls and how to kind of overcome those so you can get a cleaner, better signal and you can get a better guitar tone in the end. Let's check it out. All right, so now we're in Cubase. So what I want to do is I want to talk about some of the things to keep in mind when you're recording guitar DI, and then I want to show you examples of what not to do or how to make stylistic and selective choices. So the first thing that we need to talk about has to be done every time. It's non-negotiable, and that is tuning your guitar. I know it sounds like a basic step, but I get so many stems where the guitar is just out of tune. I figured I should mention it. So I use this little clip-on tuner. It's by Uber Tuner, by Click. I got it from Amazon. I think it was like maybe $10, $12. Works great. You just clip it to the headstock, turn it on, and play the guitar. If you are recording your guitar into a DAW, a lot of the time DAWs will have guitar tuners, or amp sims will have them built in. So I'm going to be using the Quarry Wong amp from Neural DSP for a lot of this. And of course, it has a tuner built in. You can just drag that in, turn on your monitor for your recording, and then you can tune your guitar up with that. I say tune every take. If not every take, then at least every few takes, and then every couple minutes, because some guitars will go out of tune super, super fast. Luckily, one of my guitars will stay in tune for weeks at a time, so it's not a huge issue, but just make sure you keep that in mind because it can be a mess. The second thing that I want to talk about before you record anything is maybe think about changing your strings, because updating your strings can kind of give you a completely different tone. So I know as a producer, you know, your guitar is kind of always sitting there. If you have one, it can be hard to want to update your strings regularly. Some songs will just have to make do with more dead strings. However, try to change them at least every couple months, maybe once a quarter, and you'll find that it can make a pretty drastic difference. So let me show you an example of what old strings sound like versus new strings. And you might have a preference. It just gives a totally different sound. So the old strings will be here in the teal. The new strings will be here in this pink. Here are the old strings. You can hear that the new strings have a completely different tone. I was able to play them a little bit softer so that transient comes through, because new strings will tend to have a bit more transient, they'll have a bit more brightness, and the low end I find is just more consistent and more well-rounded, because as strings start to age, I find that they start to thin out and the mids become more pronounced. So there's an example on the plugs. It's not make or break on something like that. Like, I could definitely use either of those, but when we have a guitar riff like this, this is where you'll notice a huge difference. So the teal are the old strings, these bright green are the new strings. Take a listen. Versus this. Hear how much more punchy and transient and bright those are? That makes a massive difference in terms of the mix, especially when you kind of do something like this and you pop on a guitar tone. Versus this. Kind of cleaned up some of those low mids. It's going to sit in the mix a little bit better. If I turn the mix back on, you'll kind of hear it in context. Versus this. So just something to keep in mind when you are recording guitar. Maybe swap out your strings every once in a while. So once you've done both of those, the next issue that I see people commonly running into is their guitar DI just has so much noise. So let's go ahead and take a look at some examples of that and how to remedy that. So here's example number one. This is going to be PC interference noise. It could come from your computer or your phone. It sounds a little bit something like this. Kind of like an old radio static hum. And what's basically happening is the electronics in your guitar and the electronics in your computer or your phone are just getting mixed up, and it's kind of creating this interference. So easy ways to get rid of this are back away from your computer, put your computer on the other side of the room, or just get a longer guitar cord and go to the other side. You can turn your body away from the computer, take your phone out of your pocket, and it'll clean up a lot of that signal just by kind of creating some space. You also might run into something like this. That sound tends to come from either a loose cable, a bad wire in a guitar or an interface or a cable, or like a grounding issue inside of your room. So easiest ways to get rid of this, try a new cable, plug your interface into a different outlet, or plug it into something like a power conditioner or a surge protector. And then if neither of those things work, maybe think about taking your guitar into a shop and seeing if they need to clean any wires or replace any wires. If you can't get around either of those issues and they're still there a little bit inside of your actual guitar track, let me show you how to get rid of some of that. So you can use something like denoise or guitar denoise or something like that from like Isotope RX or from Waves or from Spectral Layers. However, I find that tends to get really expensive, and I love the RX suite, but if you don't already have it, there's an easier way to get rid of this most of the time. Here's an example of the guitar with noise. You can hear that noise. Let me make it mono so you can hear it a little bit easier. What you can do is you can turn on a guitar gate. So here it is with the amp sim. Much more noticeable. Let's turn on this gate, and what this will do is it'll kind of only let certain sound pass a threshold through. So it'll get rid of a lot of this background noise. We can turn it up even a little bit more. One thing to keep in mind though, if you do use a gate, is longer sustained notes are going to start to have the tail cut off. So if you have a super plucky, poppy riff like this, you can probably get away with it. If you're holding your notes out and they're kind of sustaining, that gate will start to introduce issues if you don't have that planned exactly right. And then not only that, but a gate is just not going to get rid of the sound that's actually underneath the guitar. So even though it's not sticking out in silent moments, that's still baked into this. And when you start layering tons and tons of guitar that has that computer noise or that DC hum, that's going to start to add up in your mix, and it's going to start to get in the way of things. So try to clean up that noise by separating yourself from the computer, fix your grounding issues, and then if you need to, use something like a gate or something like the RX bundle or Spectral Layers to get rid of that. The next thing to keep in mind to get a cleaner tone when you are using DI is to get your gain staging right going into your DAW. So here's an example of what I super commonly see, and that is that people just have their preamp or their interface way too loud, and their guitar DI clips sound something like this. Brace yourself, it'll be loud. You can hear that audible distortion, and even if we clip gain this down, it's quieter, but that crunchy distortion, that breakup is still happening there. And it's not like a pleasant overdrive or distortion like you get from a pedal or like clipping a kick drum or an 808. This just sounds like garbage 99% of the time, and it's something that you don't want. So make sure you don't record your guitar too hot, because that will start to come through, especially as you put tones on it. You're gonna have this weird like crackling and clipping, and it's gonna clap like clicks and pops. You're just not gonna want it in your song at all. And then on the opposite of that, make sure that you don't have your guitar too quiet, because if it's too quiet, you're gonna have to increase that volume so much to get the tone right in the amp sim or to get it sitting in the mix, and that's gonna raise up any background noise that you do have. So even if you don't have glaring issues like we talked about a minute ago, you're always gonna have a little bit of a noise floor between your guitar and your interface. And if you record it too quiet and you have to raise that guitar, it's also gonna raise that noise. So try to keep a good signal to noise ratio, because that can really make a massive difference with getting a clean guitar tone that is not going to have a lot of that feeding into an amp sim, especially if you add things like overdrive, distortion, chorus, etc. I want you to keep one thing in mind too when it comes to gain staging, and that is that the level of your guitar DI will drastically affect how the amp sim is going to kind of communicate with it. So a lot of the time with real guitars, the louder you play your guitar, it's going to introduce a little bit more overdrive, it's going to introduce a little bit more fuzz, and it's going to compress that guitar a little bit. And this also happens with amp sims. So let's take a look at this. Let me swap this so it's not on like a DI amp, because it'll be a little easier to notice. Here's what it sounds like with the level we recorded at. It sounds great. It's the perfect level in my opinion for recording guitar. If I were to clip gain this up like this, you can hear that it compresses it. We lose some of that transient. It introduces a little bit more overdrive. And if we drag this down, it's a little bit more transient. It doesn't have as much compression and it doesn't have as much overdrive. And that's because the incoming level will affect how these different guitar pedals react, how this amp head reacts, how this cab reacts. So play around with some of your input levels. You can either do it by clip gain or adjusting this input knob on whatever amp sim you're using. Most of them will have that. But if you're finding that your tone is still not fitting the right aesthetic or it's not having the exact sound you want, play around with pushing your guitar a little bit more, bringing it down a little bit, and kind of introducing some of those more natural dynamics like you would with a real guitar amp and cab. Now outside of that, let's say you've got your level perfect, there's no background noise, you've got new strings, your guitar's tuned up, it's sounding great. Another thing that people need to keep in mind when recording guitar is what kind of guitar you're using for the song and the riff at hand. So I'm going to show you a couple examples, and today we're going to focus on something like a Gibson Les Paul versus a Fender Strat. I find these to kind of be the two big heavy hitters of different guitar styles. You have your kind of heavier, humbucker driven things like Les Pauls, ESPs, PRS guitars, something like that. Then you have your single coil, kind of lighter, easier toned Fender Stratocasters, your Telecasters, like your PRS John Mayer series, things that are really driven for like clean poppy tones. So keep in mind that a different guitar is going to have a massively different tone, and one of the biggest things of that is going to be the pickup. So we're going to talk about a couple different pickup styles. We're going to talk about humbuckers versus single coil. So a humbucker is something that looks like this. You're going to see these as more of those like big block pickups. You're going to find these a lot in the things like the Gibson Les Pauls, the SGs, the PRSs, and these are really, really good for rock. They're really good for driving with like overdrive and distortion because they tend to be a bit darker. They tend to have a little bit more pronounced midsection, and the top end is not nearly as buzzy and bright, which means that you can drive that a lot harder with things like distortion. Then on the other hand, we've got single coils, and you'll find these in like your Stratocasters, your Telecasters, any kind of like pop-driven 80s, 90s, and kind of 2000 pop guitar tone is probably done with a single coil. And these tend to be a little bit more bright, a little bit more bubbly. The mids are kind of scooped out, and these work really nice with things like Fender amps, things like the Roland Jazz Chorus. They're going to give you that like twangy 1975 tone, that like smooth, clean, kind of like John Mayer clean edge of breakup tone. Fender or any kind of other single coil is going to be the pick for that. So let me show you just a pretty pronounced difference of how these different pickups sound, and I'm going to show you with some guitar chugs. So this is something that I would actually probably use the Les Paul for because it kind of lends itself better to that. Here's what it sounds like on the Fender, opposed to here's how it sounds on the Les Paul. So first listen, you're probably thinking that Les Paul sounds garbage, it's super dark, it's super thick. However, once you start adding in saturation and distortion and like a rock guitar amp, that Les Paul holds up a lot better. This Fender is going to get really scratchy. It's going to have this weird, brittle, almost like metallic top end. So picking the right guitar can be a massive difference depending on what kind of riff you're playing. And then outside of picking the actual guitar model, you also have to pick the right pickup. So things like your humbucker guitars are typically going to have your bridge pickup and your neck pickup. That's going to be the pickup on the bottom and the pickup on the top. And the bridge pickup is going to be a little bit more bright, a little bit more aggressive, tends to be a little bit more scooped. And then your neck pickup is going to be a little bit rounder, a little bit softer, and a little bit more full-bodied. Then you've got a pickup setting in the middle that's kind of a blend of both. You're going to find something really similar on single coil pickups. They tend to have 3 pickups, and a lot of the time it's either 3 single coils or a humbucker, single coil, single coil. So depending on your guitar, you're going to want to mess around with it. But again, the bridge pickup is going to be the brightest, most scooped, most aggressive sound. The mid is going to be kind of a blend of that, and then the top pickup is going to be your most round, your most plucky, your most poppy. And then on 3 pickup guitars, you'll have parameters in the middle. So there will be 5 pickup selections ranging from brightest, bright mixed with the mid, mid mixed with the dark neck, and then the neck, which is going to be the darkest. So let's take a look at all of those. So let's listen to the pickup positions, and you'll drastically hear how this changes the guitar sound. So that is the bridge pickup of a Fender Strat. Here is the bridge in middle. You'll hear it still has that bright metallic-iness, but it's starting to introduce some of those weird, like, bubbly mids. Here is the middle pickup. I love this one for pop stuff. It tends to be really bright and forward, and it has that low end, but it's not so kind of like jangly like the bridge pickup, and it's not so soft like a neck pickup. Here is a mix of the middle and the neck. I don't typically use this position too often because it has this kind of like weird mid scoop where it's super bubbly on the low end, it's super bright on the top end, but I'm not getting much else. And then here is the neck pickup. This and the middle pickup are probably what I use the most often. That's going to give you that like bubbly but still kind of scooped, super twangy guitar tone, and it responds really well to clean guitar amps. So picking the right pickup selection for your tone can be massive. Like if I turn on a guitar tone, I'll do a quick little sweep of like 1 versus 3 versus 5. You can hear how thin and kind of boxy and aggressive that is. And then this one has that kind of like boxiness and aggression of the first one with a little bit more low end, and then we have this one that's going to be super bubbly, super like poppy and transient. And that one has a really, really nice top sheen. I'd probably use the neck pickup in this example. I could also use the middle pickup. Probably wouldn't use any others for this specific example. Keep in mind though, the pickup will change depending on what riff you're playing. So I might use that pickup for this, but you know, let's say this riff a little bit later down in the line, this riff might get a different pickup. Maybe not, just play around with it. Now, the last thing to keep in mind to get perfect guitar DI is your playing style. So I hear a lot of people talk about tone is in the hands, tone is how you play, and I know it sounds corny, but it can be true. The way that you play a song can drastically affect the tone. So things to keep in mind are you using a pick? Are you finger plucking as a guitar? Are you strumming it? Are you kind of whacking it? How are you playing this guitar? Because different things have different vibes. So like this is plucked with a pick. But if I were to use my fingers, that would be a lot softer, a lot less transient and aggressive, and it might have like a softer, rounder tone. So if this is feeling too much, maybe do a finger pick instead. And what kind of pick you use really matters. So like if you're finding that there is just too much initial transient and the guitar doesn't have enough like oomph and sustain or like enough roundness when you hit a note, your pick might be a little bit too thin, because the thinner the pick is, the more it's going to have that initial transient response, but it's not going to kind of get this big, thick, round pluck. Or vice versa, you're using a pick that's too thick and it's not giving you that soft strum that you're kind of looking for. So play around with how hard you play something, how soft you play something, what kind of pick you use, and then what playing style that you use, because that can really, really, really drastically affect how the guitar feels and sounds in a mix. So let's go to an example where I played the same riff two very different ways. So this verse version is how I would play it in a mix. It's going to be hard. I'm using a pretty thick pick and it's pretty aggressive. On this version, I'm using a thinner pick and I'm playing it much softer. And when you play something softer, you're going to get a bit more note separation between the different strings, because softer tends to be a little bit slower. So you'll hear that this isn't quite as tight, it's not nearly as slappy, and it doesn't have the same sonic characteristic. That's giving you almost more of like a ukulele type strum. And in the mix, that makes a massive difference. So, you know, here it is with a guitar tone. Here is the thinner pick played softer. It's darker, it's rounder, it's messier, and it just has a totally different vibe. If I play it in the song, you're gonna hear that the second version just does not fit the vibe of the song at all. versus this. So keep in mind, if your guitar is not sounding good when you're putting your tone on it, maybe you're playing it too hard, maybe you're playing it too soft. As you can hear, no matter what we do to this tone, this guitar is just not going to sit right. It's way too soft, it's way too loose, it's way too dark. So yeah, that's the last thing to keep in mind. So I would say it's just a good mix of tune your guitar, put good strings on your guitar, make sure that you don't have background noise, make sure your incoming levels are good so you don't have clipping and you don't have a huge noise floor. Feed that gain into the guitar amp the way that you want that amp to respond. And then outside of that, pick the right guitar. Once you have the right guitar, pick the right pickup setting. And then once you do all of that, understand how you want to play that riff. Do you want to use a pick? Do you want to finger pluck it? Do you want to strum it? Do you want to pick it really hard? Do you want to pick it really soft? Is it going to be a slow kind of arpeggiated pick? All of those things will make massive, massive differences. So hopefully this video kind of highlights everything that you should keep in mind when you're recording your guitar DI. And yeah, that's pretty much all that goes into getting a nice clean tone that's going to be easy to tone sculpt. And there you have it. Those are some of the steps and tips and techniques that I like to use when I'm recording guitar. Definitely keep these things in mind when you are tracking your guitar DI, because the cleaner DI you have, the more options and the more selection you're going to have with building your tone. You can boost high end without getting nasty noise, etc., etc. So hopefully this video was a big help. Again, if you like this video, please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It helps us out a ton. And then if you want to support the channel, you can head over to makepopmusic.com and check out all of the extra stuff we have over there. But that's going to do it for this video, and we will see you guys next week with more content. Much love, everyone. Peace.